I'm going to just text Dr. Thank you. And I'm just going to text Dr. Geraci here. And then, let's see. Time for your meeting period. So, so great. Good. Anything for the good of the order before we get started? Michael, thank you for your email this morning. By all means, you know, if your schedule changes, please join the class. Robert's taking the class. Dan is taking the class. Archana, you got some information on the course. Please spread it around or take it or again. So yeah, so we're doing it, guys. We're doing it. So anything we need to deal with before we let Dr. Kiley launch into it at the Dr. Kiley is what, 3 o'clock in the morning out there in California? Is that about right?
It's 5. It's 5. Yeah, it's 5. It's dark.
So you're gonna get done at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then let's like
I can go right back to bed.
which I doubt. So okay, so let's start. We're doing I'm having Loree come back with us and talk with us this time, because last time she did a whole session on systems. And David, thank you for recording this. I know folks are watching this. I know Ken Snyder's watching this on systems. And so based on that, we thought we'd have Loree has been gracious enough to come back and to talk about influence, which is one of her powerful areas in some of the work that she does. So now we know about the system. How do you influence the system to change? So Dr. Kiley, round of applause. Thank you so much for being with us. So love you. And so go get them.
Okay. All right, my sweet friend. And thank you for the opportunity here. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to see all of you. And thank you for the hard work that you do. And Raj and I have been talking about this. Well, of course, Raj and I have been talking about this for 20 some years.
Yeah, right.
But you figure out how to figure out what the problem is, which Roger has a new book coming out about that. And then also there it is.
Well, that look like
shameless advertising, that one, right?
Shameless, right?
So you do this creative problem solving, you come up with absolutely fantastic ideas about solutions to what we call wicked problems, the big ones. But now you've got an answer that's actually really, really good, and it's going to be fantastic, and you've really thought it through, but you still have to sell it because other people have to agree that it's a good idea and so on. So this is kind of the last piece of the whole puzzle when it comes to how do we get other people to buy into it, because they might not have been in the process where we discovered the solution. And that's what this is about. So I've got way too much material today. So if you have, I probably won't get through all the slides, but I'll get through the ones that are meaningful enough to you so you get a sense of what it means to change a system. And it's not as hard as you would think, actually. It just takes methodic intention, I think is probably the right word for it, and knowing a couple things about human beings. The first thing I just want to tell you about in general about human beings is that we're a piece of work. We are interesting creatures, and we're very quirky. And as much as, and you all are well educated and professional and so on, that's really important to recognize the rest of the world still operates more on emotion than it does on logic or reasoning and all that kind of stuff. One thing we know about human beings in order to try to influence us, you actually have to crawl inside who we really are, but you mostly also have to figure out, how do I connect with what matters to them? So that's where I'm going with this. We're going to talk about large scale influence and then narrow it down to how do we change the mind of one other human being. But don't hesitate to ask me questions. I've got materials for you. I've got some worksheets that you can just take with you that can be helpful as you navigate this. This, I think, also was generated somewhat by Dr. Robert, our wonderful Dr. Robert, saying, how the heck are we going to change the healthcare system? And I'll show you how it's done, actually. But it also takes intention, and it takes some pretty interesting navigation. So I'll show you where we're going from there. But the main point I wanted to make as we launch into this is that human beings, care more about who they hear information from than they care about the quality of the information. And we've known this for ages. And it's important to know this because, frankly, if If we think just giving them a compelling argument is enough, it's not. It also mainly depends on who they hear it from. Whose mouth is this coming from? And that's the most persuasive of all, is I believe who I hear, not necessarily what I hear. So let me launch into this, and let me know if you have any questions. Don't hesitate to interrupt me, because this is about you and I'm hoping to help you. I'm working out here with the healthcare system as well. I'm also working nationwide with this new crazy project where everybody's going to get dumped off of Medicaid, and nationwide. I'm working on that project right now, and it's a mess. It's a colossal mess. And the downside to this is they didn't organize it very well, and they're going to do it anyway. And that we're going to lose a lot of people off of Medicaid who desperately need help and desperately need care. So just to let you know, I'm in on it at that level, and I understand how complicated it is and how hard it is to get the patients to you when they need to be with you, and when they need to find you and when they need care. So don't hesitate to interrupt me and ask me some questions, and I'll test out my PowerPoint, of course, because PowerPoint is the way the world works these days. Hang on a sec. Yeah, boy, I don't know what we would have done without Zoom and PowerPoint over COVID. I don't know what we would have done. It would have been chaotic even more than it was. So hopefully you are seeing my slides.
Got it?
Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk about networked influence. So I'm not just talking, and then as we do a deeper dive, I'm going to talk about influencing individuals, but I want to talk to you about influencing a whole network, because if you really want to change the healthcare system, it's really important to know how do you manage and maneuver and affect a whole system, which is where we were the last time we were together, is about systems. So networked influence. This, by the way, this is actually a real case in healthcare where this is part of the state system in California. We've got software that actually maps networks. It's very sexy stuff. It's really fun. And we went out to the state of California, and they asked us to help with trying to find the connectors to all of the agencies in the entire state, nonprofits, government agencies, schools, and so on, who have a vested interest in fixing homelessness, which is, of course, a very wicked problem. And it's not just one problem, it's multiple problems to solve. So we mapped here, this particular map is individuals. Each of those little dots is an individual. And they're all people who are in different agencies here in the state that have to do with helping homelessness. And we mapped it to find out which individuals had connections from one agency to another. So if you can see these pods, those pods are an agency, and the dots are people in that agency. And the connectors show who they are connected to specifically, one individual to another. You can see their names in there, and the frequency of their contact. So you can measure all kinds of things in the network, but this one said, who do you know, who do you interact with, and how frequently do you interact with them from one agency to another. The beautiful thing about this, if you move one dot, connect it to another dot in a different pod, it actually shifts the whole system. And it's like fireworks getting shifted. I don't have an animation to show you that, but it's fascinating how, back to the systems pieces, any change in a system, no matter how small, shifts the entire system. And so you connect one dot from one pod to another dot in another pod, and you actually shift the whole thing. And it's just absolutely beautiful to watch. You can see the actual effect on a system. So this is that agency. You'll notice that in the upper left, that's actually one of the most important agencies here in the state, and they're not connected to anybody with any kind of frequency. Somebody'd say, yeah, I think I know somebody over there, but I don't know if I've talked to them in a while or something. So you can see this, and time is the driver, because we don't have much more than 24 hours in a day. So time is the driver, but we're missing the point of the connections and how valuable and how critical they are. And I will say over and over and over again that relationships drive the world. If we don't have healthy relationships, we're not going to be able to accomplish anything. And if we have healthy relationships, we can move mountains. So it's important to recognize how important these are connections. And these are not just people who have, well, let's network and have coffee with each other. These are people who have real relationships with each other. And I go back again to why that matters is we care more about where information comes from than we care about the quality of the information. And if you don't believe me, just look at the nation right now. It's more important what club we belong to than why we belong to it or what the club stands for. And this is what human beings do. We collect, we connect, but not necessarily out of anything rational. So that's an example. This is how we then changed it. So this is the new network of that state system. We took a look at who needed to be connected to whom and what kind of connections we needed. And that's what it looks like now. And that might actually get us somewhere. But this one was not going to get us anywhere, and we're spinning our wheels. And this is eating up way too much time and going nowhere. This one can actually move some things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But let me define the term here of influence. It's best used when you're trying to arrive at a mutually agreeable outcome. It's necessary when you have some common ground and some disagreement. If you have absolute common ground, just do it. You can actually talk yourselves out of something if you try too hard. If you've got absolute common ground, just move on it. Just do it. If you can find no common ground, then let it go. But I would suggest to you, having done this for decades, there's always common ground, always. And we know when it's succeeded when it translates into behaviors and the relationship is still intact. Did it change or motivate some actions? And do we still say a friendly hello to each other when we run into each other on the street? That's the and that's the measure. It's a pretty simple measurement. So I'll give you an example of that, just a silly example. But let's say, well, so I've got Blair up here. I've only got a column of people. So I've got Blair up here. Let me pick on Blair for a sec. So say, for example, Blair lives across the street from me, and he's got a 1967 MGB that he just loves. It's a vintage car. He's had it for ages. He just loves this car, right? And my husband really loves Blair's car, and he wants Blair's car. And so I'm thinking, well, my husband's had a big birthday coming up. Maybe Blair will sell me that car. So I go over to Blair and say, Blair, I'd love to buy that MGB from you. For Dan, and I want to give it to him for a birthday present, and I'll offer you $1,000 over Blue Book price. And Blair says, deal, great. And I hand him a check, and he goes away happy, and I drive the car away. So that does not demand any kind of influence because we have absolute common ground, right? What's missing is some areas where we disagree. Some areas where we don't have common ground. So scenario number 2, I go to Blair and say, Blair, I'd really love to buy that car. And he said, no. I'm not going to sell that car. It's one of my priceless, most precious possessions. He said, I've driven that car for years and years and years. He said, I drove it in high school. I got it in high school, and it was a vintage car then. I'm trying to help you out here with age stuff, Blair. But there was a vintage car then, and he said, I had my first kiss in that car. No, I'm not going to sell you that car. So I walk away. Under that kind of definition, do we need to have influence? Well, the answer is no, because we have no common ground. All we have is differences. But I will tell you, there's always common ground, but our job is to find it. And sometimes it's not where you look. So say, for example, scenario number 3. Blair has this wonderful car. I want to buy it for my husband. I go over to him and say, I'll buy you that car from you. He said, no. I don't want to sell that car. And I said, well, I'll pay you twice Blue Book. And he said, no. I don't want to sell that car. I said, you know what, Blair, I want that car so much. I'll give you $100,000 for it. And Blair says, yeah, that's an interesting proposal, but I'm still not sure if I want to sell it. And he said, I'm a graduate student of Roger Firestein, so I don't really need the money because I'm independently wealthy because of what Roger has taught me, and so I don't really need the money.
Hope you're recording this, David.
So it still looks like we don't have any common ground, but I've been paying attention to Blair. I've been in his home, and I've noticed that he has a full set of first edition hand-signed Ernest Hemingway novels. He's a Hemingway fan. And does that have anything to do with my wanting the car? Everything about Blair has to do with what I want. but you have to expand where you think the common ground might be. And say, for example, Blair's a fly fisherman, and he actually ties flies in his garage, and it's one of his hobbies, and he loves to fly fish. And say, for example, my great grandfather was good friends with Ernest Hemingway, and when Hemingway died, he actually willed my grandfather 2 of his fly rods that I later inherited. Now, do I have some common ground? Absolutely. I might be able to trade Blair a Hemingway fly rod, an authentic Hemingway fly rod, for that car. So everything about Blair matters. It's not always about the same topic or the same interest area. It has to do with everything about Blair matters here. So if we take that a little bit further, we're talking about what I call suasion, and that's an old word that actually means it means ethical persuasion. Persuasion is kind of an amoral concept. Suasion is a moral concept. It means you're using integrity to actually influence other people and not trying to trick them or anything. But it's a process where you intentionally seek to influence somebody's thoughts and actions through ethical strategies, and I'll tell you how you can ensure that it's ethical. Because if you're watching out there, we're getting an awful lot of unethical messaging out there that's not even true. And I'll show you how to make sure that it's ethical when you use this. This is why I don't just teach this to anybody, because this is very, very powerful stuff, and it works like crazy, and you don't want this in the hands of unethical people. So through ethical strategies, meaning competence in terms of being effective and appropriate. It's one thing to be effective, but you also have to be appropriate, which also means honest. And changing and modifying and shaping the responses of the receivers, yet maintaining an open mind for mutual influence. Isn't that an interesting concept? When's the last time you saw that? Where I'm trying to change your mind, but I'm open enough to maybe let you change mine. Now that's a human interaction that's way more noble than some of the things that we're seeing out there. But I bring up the receiver first, the receiver of the message first, because frankly, they are the ones who determine what you're saying and what you mean. The burden of communication is in the sender of the message. And this is different what most people think. So, well, if you listen to me, then the burden's on you. You have to listen to what I'm saying, but I'm actually advocating the opposite, that the burden of communication is in the sender, because meaning is in the receiver. And what we hope is that they understand genuinely what we mean, but that means they are how we determine the messaging. How do they need to hear it? And the only way you can have influence over another human being is to crawl inside what matters to them. That's not what we typically do. We give all kinds of persuasive messages coming from what we believe in, and that's not what works. Just because we believe it doesn't mean we can hit them over the head with it. So I use this is Chris Argyris's model of the ladder of influence, which I absolutely love. You know this one, Blair? This is fantastic.
Yeah, I love this.
I love this one too. And it really tells us how we arrive at our reality. And there's nothing real about it. And so what Argyris says about this is how we think through stuff and how we come to our own personal reality. First of all, it's a ladder, and we go up this ladder to make sense out of things. And every step up that ladder, there's an opportunity for our stories to diverge. So that by the time we get to the ladder, one of us is in Mars and the other one's in Venus, right? So, for example, at the base of the ladder, we all have the same available information, but there's too much. There's way too much information. We're stimuli overload for sure. And so we sort out different things to pay attention to and we pulled independent little things out of all that noise, and we will observe different things from one another. So we're already on a path to not have the same reality. I'm going to pull out different things that I pay attention to, and you're going to pull out different things from me. And this is just the facts and the information, just observation. So there's no even opinion at this point, but we notice different things. So we're already starting out going in 2 different directions. So you're going to notice different things than I do. And then the next step up the ladder, as we notice different things, next step up the ladder is that we're influenced by our past experience. This is the way the brain works. I'm not sure if Roger told you, but I've got a degree in neuroscience, and boy, we know the brain does this. The brain takes in information, and then it goes to wherever we have something like it in our brain. So there's nothing real about that. It's just compared to our own experience, and that's how we make sense out of things. So from there, we go up one more step, and we form conclusions, and our conclusions reflect our self-interest. And it doesn't mean everybody's narcissistic. It's just that we've got to cut out noise in order to make sense out of things, but the sense we make is very unique to us. The danger in this is at the top of that ladder is righteousness. And if we argue with each other from the point of righteousness, it will never work. And if just think about these concepts as you think about the political system out there right now, we're seeing it everywhere. Everywhere. They're arguing from a point of righteousness. There's a book that came out a few years ago called The Righteous Mind. And it talks about how righteousness is not really a very good concept for us because it's an entrenchment. It's a taproot. So we're going all the way through all of this. And at the very top that we have totally different ideas about what is real and what matters and what's the right thing to do and so on and so forth. And always reflecting our self-interest. It's just human, which tells you we're not done yet. Yeah, so at every piece here, the thing to do is to move from being sure we're right to being curious about what's going on, objectively. And it only takes one person in a situation to be viewing things with an open mind. It only takes one, because everybody else is going to go immediately to their conclusion. But if we can back that up and walk down a different path together, then you have the influence over the whole system, actually. The open mind has influence over the whole system. So that's one of my favorite concepts. It's a really powerful one. And walk through this. Try this sometime with anything that you're going through where you've got a disagreement with somebody. Go but down. The trick here with Ardress's model is not to walk up our own ladder, because we know what our ladder is. We live inside it. We know what it is, but that's what we normally do. We normally figure out all of our reasons for why this should happen, by golly. I'm suggesting the only way we're going to ever be effective is if we spend that time walking up somebody else's ladder. Who we want to influence, let's walk up their ladder and see if we can find out what really matters to them, because that's how we're going to be able to influence them. So, heard this quote just the other day, and I thought, this is so powerful. It means basically that to be the most effective influencers, we have to listen as fiercely as we hope to be heard. Isn't that a great quote? I mean, everybody says you have to listen to people, but that one listen as fiercely as you hope to be heard. You do that, and you've got the influence of the whole system. So there are a couple of things that we know that work extremely well for being persuasive. One of those has to do with that whenever you have an idea you want to share with someone, or a solution you want to share with someone, is to have three possibilities. This is beautiful because it links so well to the creative process. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, that's our buddy.
That's our buddy. Rogers, yeah.
Right. But the power of relative advantage is extremely powerful. I'm going to give you two of the most persuasive techniques, and this is one of them. And when you do the creative problem solving process, you'll come up with one that you think is really good, but you're going to come up with a couple of other ideas that are not too bad as well. We've found that if you want to sell an idea to people, if you give them three possibilities of what the solution might be, and let them choose which one has relative advantage over the others. So I would come to my parties that I want to influence and say, here are three possibilities we've come up with. We came up with 20 or so. We've narrowed it down to these three. And we think possibility B has relative advantage over the other two. Not, this is the one right answer. It's, here are three possible answers, and this one has relative advantage over the others, and here's why. Is one of the most powerful strategies you can ever use to sell an idea. And the reason for that is because, first of all, people like choice. They don't like having one idea. If you only hand them one idea, they will assume that it's in your favor and that it's biased. So they'll fight you on it. So if you give me 3 and say this one has relative advantage over the other, it also demonstrates critical thinking. You've given them choice, and their automatic assumption is going to be, wow, this guy really thought it through, and I really appreciate that. That's awesome. So it's a very powerful technique for influencing folks and giving them choice. Human beings are choice-making animals. We don't like not having choice. We really don't like that. The second most powerful, not necessarily in any order, is when you sell an idea, when you want people to be influenced by an idea. Our typical strategy has always been, so here's what I think should happen, and here's what it's going to cost to make this happen, and so on. We have found, and I've done this gazillions of times, and it works almost every time. Instead of telling people what the cost of doing your idea is going to be, tell them the cost of not doing it. It's unbelievably compelling. I don't know why, but it has to do with the fear factor and how the brain works and all kinds of stuff. But if you tell me the cost of not doing something, because I haven't considered that yet, it's way more compelling than the cost of doing something. When you want to shift this healthcare system, that's critical piece of information. Tell people what it's costing us, because the numbers are staggering. But we keep going for what it's going to cost us. That's not enough information. So figure out the cost of not doing it. I've watched this in politics here in California over and over and over again. If you shift to try to tell the electeds, here's what it's going to cost if we don't do this, they'll go, oh, wow, we better fix that. So those are 2 of the compelling reasons. And if you got any questions, please let me know. But so that's the receiver. Now here's the sender information. So as I said, we care more about where the information comes from than we care about the quality of the information. So what makes a person believable? It's called credibility, and there are decades of study on this that are fascinating. You run your life based on an account that's very much like a checking account that's called your credibility account. And if you have high levels of credibility, you're believable. And if your credibility is low, you're not believable, because we still care more about who's saying it than what they're saying. So there are different kinds of credibility. Face credibility is if you don't know me, or if you do know me, like Roger. Roger's very well known as in the world of creativity, and people know his name. He walks in with face credibility, even if they've never met him before, because they've heard his name, they've read his books. He's had a pretty good spread out there. That's face credibility. You walk in, they know who you are. Earned credibility is if they don't know who you are, you have to borrow it from somebody that they do know, that they do believe. So if I want to change your mind and say, I think you should buy a Toyota, why would you believe me about that? So I have to borrow that credibility from a source that they do believe. So I would say, I think you should buy a Toyota because Car and Driver magazine says it's the safest car on the road. If you believe Car and Driver magazine, I have just borrowed the credibility from a source that you believe. And that goes into your account. So you're building your own credibility, but you're also getting them to listen to you because the source is something that you believe in. And so what is it? It's how to make deposits into your account by being associated with things that people agree with and that make them feel good. You put deposits into your account. And you also take debits out of it by being associated with something that people are not happy about. That's how emotionally driven we are. So with that in mind, I'm going to skip here and get to the networked influence piece. Well, no, I think I will go back here to this one slide. If you want to convince me, say, for example, you've just given me a little pitch. Your pitch has to come in this order. The first thing out of your mouth has to be the ethos of this. These are the wonderful Greek terms. The ethos of it is, here's the source of this information, and that has to be the first thing out of your mouth. Where's the source from? And it has to be a source that the other party believes in. The second piece of information that put into the little pitch is logos, which is data, statistics, numbers. And the third piece that you put in, and it has to come in this order, is pathos. Pathos is causing them to feel something. Like if you say to them, here's the cost of not doing it. It's really not about the logos, although they'll look at the numbers and so on. But what has happened is you've made them feel something. So it has to come in this order. If you put pathos first, it's too strong. People will back off of that. So you have to go with, here's the source, here's the data, and here's how I want you to feel about it. So if, for example, in the Sources Car and Driver magazine, it says it's like the safest car on the road, and here's some statistics. But most of all, if you put your family in that car, you're going to feel like they're safe. That's pathos. If you look at where the mind is actually changed, however, it's changed always at pathos. Always. And somebody's going to say, well, no, I changed my mind because I believe data. And I said, yeah, I know you think that. But the only reason is that to you, logos is pathos. It makes you feel good. So that's when you want to pitch. And that's the kind of one-on-one story of how to move other people more in your direction in an ethical way. I mean, obviously, all of this has to be truth. You can't be making stuff up, although people do. But now let's apply this to the network. So, as I showed you, these networks need some serious fixing, because one of these actually that looks very much like this one we did at JPL and on the Mars project. And they had one pod up here in the upper left where they weren't connected to anybody else on the Mars project at JPL and NASA. Like, they looked at that and they thought, oh my God, these guys are not even connecting with us, and they're one of the instrumental pieces, and they're not talking to each other on a regular basis. So they have to shifted that as well. So let's take a look at your network, right? So you want to figure out, this is your network, right? And all those little circles are stakeholders, one form or another. Anybody who's got a stake in what you do, defined in any way you want. There are lots of different kinds of stakeholders. So the issues in the middle, all the stakeholders. And what you would do on this map here is you'd put the different stakeholders in these circles. Like, you know, Roger might be in one, and the whole NASA department might be in this another one, and the CEO may be in another one. All the stakeholders that have some skin in the game for what you're trying to shift, who will be affected positively or negatively by what you are trying to accomplish. Then this is the first step, and you put everybody in these little circles. And then you connect. There are three types of folks, right? There are going to be those who are positives, the pluses. There are going to be those who are negatives, the minuses. And then there are going to be some that we don't know where they stand. So the ones who are positive, you draw a solid line. The ones who are you're unsure of, draw a dotted line. And the ones that are negative toward your idea, that you assume will be negative towards your idea, you give them a negative. You don't draw any line. And this gives you a map showing you how much work you have to do to try to move things. And the neat thing about this map and doing this way, you realize it's not quite as daunting as you thought it was. When you start to see the map here and who's connected to you and so on and so forth. But the real interesting question here is, if you had to do people in a sequence, you know, the pluses, the minuses, or the question marks, if you had to do them in a sequence, most people think what you do is you go to the negatives or you go to the question marks first. But that's actually not true at all. You go to the positives first. You build your bench. Spend your time with the people who are on the same side as you, or you'll lose them by neglect. Build your bench first. Sit down and say, I think we agree on this one. Tell me why this matters to you and why you believe this is the right thing to do, and build your bench. And then you can go to the undecideds, the question marks. And the question marks are only a question mark for a handful of reasons. One is they don't know enough information, so give them more information, then you can move them one direction or another. Another one might be that it just doesn't matter to them enough. And attach this to something that they do matter, that does matter to them. But the third reason is maybe they're waiting to see where somebody else is going to go before they land in their opinion. So you can figure out why somebody might be a question mark here, and then you'll know how to sway them one way or another. So they're the second ones you go to. And then the third ones you go to are the ones that are against you, if you did them in a sequence. So the next part of this, I'm going to skip over this for a sec. So if you take a look at the possible boxes that you have of stakeholders, you've got advocates, adversaries, and you've got these fringe people over here, the question marks. We want to move them either to a positive or find out if they're really that negative. The more complicated then it gets is when we get to the negatives. How do we change the minds of people who are strongly against what we're doing or what we're advocating? And so here's the message information. This is just a list you can have for reference about various different messaging strategies. And I give you this list because be careful, most of these don't work. Most of these are extremely irritating to people. And it's like the one in the middle, exchanging favors in order to get them to agree with you. That is one of the worst possible ways to move things forward. Because now we're just messing around with the favors instead of what we really believe is right. And that's the way Congress is run. There's something seriously wrong with that. You owe me is not a good, compelling reason. So I give you this list because as you put together your ideas, take a look at this list and see which of the categories are you falling into? Because what we want to do is go back to, a real honest discussion about these things. So now we've got the stakeholder mapping. We care more about where information comes from than we care about the quality information. So this is probably the most important piece of recognizing that if you have a really good relationship with somebody, you've got high credibility with them, you can change their mind, but you're going to spend some of your credibility to do that. It's like a bank account. If I give a really unpopular message to a person with high credibility, it will build tolerance for the message, but it will be purchased from their account. And it's actually measurable. I can measure the credibility account of a department in an organization or a whole organization in an industry, let alone an individual. You can measure this. So remember, you're going to lose something if you deliver something that people don't agree with. Anytime you deliver bad news to people, you get splashed by that bad news. We cannot tell the difference between the sender and the bad news. We automatically feel worse about the sender who delivered it to us. So can you afford it, right? Be careful. Do you have enough credibility in your account to afford it? Or like this little arrow at the bottom here, do you have a stakeholder who really believes in what you're doing and what you're thinking and so on and so forth? And that stakeholder, see the plus down here, has real strong credibility with the guy who's negative. What's beautiful about this is you can send your advocate to change the mind of your adversary. It's called a capture rate. And can you send somebody else to capture this person? Because we care more about where it comes from than we care about the quality of the information. So, but keep in mind, that's dangerous because you're asking your adversary to spend some of their equity to change the mind you're asking your advocate to change the mind of an adversary, so they're going to spend some equity. Be careful, because you don't want your advocates to lose their equity in their account too much. But that's how you can it's called a capture rate. This plus can capture this minus. This is called balance theory. And it's probably one of the most pervasive human concepts on earth. We go through this all day long, every day, about just about everything. I see you nodding, you're seeing it, right? It's fascinating to watch, because if I believe in you and you're giving me a piece of information that I don't believe in, then I better believe really strongly in you, because you're going to be spending some of your equity. But that's because I feel stronger about you than I feel negative about the issue. This is a hard thing. It's an easy thing to understand, but it's a hard thing to explain. That if for example, I think so highly of Roger, if he gives me an idea, I'm going to use he's going to use up his equity, but I might change my mind because he's the one that delivered the message. That's balance theory, right? I think more highly of Roger than I hate the idea. The downside to this is the opposite is also true. That if I hate the idea more than I like Roger, Roger's going down. He'll spend all of his equity. And that's the way human beings think. And I wouldn't necessarily call it thinking, but that's the way we react to stuff. I mean, if we could just teach people to be better critical thinkers, none of this would happen. But this is the way the world works. So those are the kinds of, like I said, Roger's going down here.
No, I got you for credibility.
Well, see, this is the beauty of it. I mean, look at the credibility just in this group alone, right? I mean, this is what you want, a high credible group, but you have to watch out for how you're spending that equity. So, see, like I said, I've got too much information here for you today, but so let me think about what's the next piece I want to show you for sure. This actually is called the 3 circles of suasion. And what you would do here, and it's actually an exercise before you try to change people's minds. In box number 1, and it's always the same process. In box number 1, you put down all of your point of view, all 3 or 4, 5, 6 points that describe your point of view about the issue. In box number 2, and I actually think I have this written up somewhere, so I can look this up and send it to Raj, and he can send it out to all of you.
Sure.
In box number 2, you write down 3 benefits that will occur if your idea is manifest, is implemented. You might have some of the same things in box 1 and box 2. Perfectly okay if you've got repetition. Then in box 3, you get completely out of your head and try to get inside the receiver's head. Give them fair hearing. Give them fair hearing here. And imagine, write down 3, 4, 5 concepts in box 3 that describe the way they might feel about this issue. What is their point of view? And this is a wonderful little model to go through because it doesn't take that long, but you start to see where to move it, and also linking back to Chris Argyris's ladder of inference, right? If you see anything in box 1 that matches in box 3, that's common ground. Use it. It may be all you need. Don't oversell. If people are starting to agree with you, then just shut up and move on. Right? I've seen people find the common ground and then they keep selling it. I'm telling you, shut up. You'll talk them out of it. But if you don't see any common ground there, take a look at the benefits. Do you see any benefits in box 2 that might match what matters to them in their point of view? That's again, common ground. But you also might take a look at it and see, I don't see any common ground at all. And that's where you have an influence opportunity. With that, you take a look at this, and then you start thinking, if there's no common ground in 1 and 3 or 2 and 3, then nothing in box 1 or box 2 matters anymore, except to you. It's not going to matter to them. So you've got to take a look at their point of view. Is there any way, there are a couple of ways to move this then, and this can be a whole group of people, by the way, not just an individual. But is there anything in their point of view that you could use to launch this idea? If there's something in their point of view and think, yeah, well, I could go with that. That's okay. Let's use that as the reason to move forward. It's their point of view. You don't necessarily have to agree with it, but it might agree with moving forward on the issue. The downside to that one, and why most people don't choose that strategy, is because they'd rather get credit and be right than to get the outcome. Because you got to give up the need to get credit for it. Or is it also possible that they're waiting to hear from somebody else before they change their minds and go back to your mapping and figure out, is it maybe that somebody else can change their mind because they're waiting to find out how that person's going to land? Then pull them in. If they've got enough equity to use and they're in favor of your idea, then it's called a capture rate. Let them capture the other one. This, by the way, it's how we have done enormous projects in this country, how we've done whole social shifts. You can shift an organization from this to this overnight by using these tools. This is how we got kids, how we got grown-ups to stop smoking. It's how the religious right actually moved things much more forward during 9/11. They were waiting for the opportunity, they weren't waiting for 9/11, but they were waiting for an opportunity to have more equity in the system. So, I mean, huge social movements have been done this way. How we got, how we got people to stop smoking? None of those dangers or threats or any of those things worked. None of the Surgeon General's messages ever worked. None of the pictures of bad lungs ever worked. You know what worked? They started going into the schools and talking to elementary kids and talking to them about not smoking. And then those little kids went home and said, Daddy, I don't want you to die of a heart attack because you're smoking. And that's what changed people from smoking. It's where they hear it from. So those are the things I sort of want to, I'm not going to go into this because I want to take some questions, but what we're trying to do is get to this, right? And these are worksheets that I am sending you to. This one tells you how to cluster, what businesses do we need in on this, what government agencies do we need in this, what voluntary or charitable nonprofits do we need in on this, in the various different agencies. And then the lower left one is really key. Have people who have lived experience about what you have, what you're moving toward, and why they had that kind of experience. So those four buckets, and find enough people in each of those. And the steps are right there on the sheet. This is another worksheet. Then the next thing you do is map those people in here and figure out, I don't know if you can see that very well, but you figure out in this sheet, you figure out, who are the ones we're really going to listen to. Who are the ones who are really going to help? And you give them a ranking about their ability to help. Their ability to help and what reason, their ability to help ranking, give them 1 through 10, their willingness to help and what's the reason, and they're willing to help ranking. And you'll be able to find immediately who you need to be building these strong lines to and these strong connections to, and who you talk to first. That'll give, so those are the worksheets that I wanted to give you. And here's another worksheet that just talks about, the stakeholder, individuals or group. Ask these questions about them so you'll have a sense of who they are. So I'll send you all these slides because those are the worksheets we work through. But ethically, I said I was going to tell you how to make sure that it's ethical. Tell people what you're doing. Be transparent. I'm trying to find something that matters to you, that I can connect what I'm wanting to something you're wanting, so we can move forward together in a positive direction. Tell people what you're doing. Be transparent. Come from a noble perspective. Be upfront about the choice. That's why I like the relative advantage concept. And treat all situations as unique, because no two are ever going to be alike. In fact, I would say, even if it's with the same person on a Monday and a Wednesday, the situation's going to be different. So that's kind of the stuff I wanted to share with you. The question is, we're so strategic about all of our other decisions in business and organizations. Do we dare leave our communication to chance and just open our mouths and see what comes out? So that's the stuff I wanted to give you. And I'm sorry it was such rushed and kind of dense, but it's a pretty good group. It's kind of fun to teach you this stuff. And I'll send you these slides, and you can always reach out to me if you've got any questions. But I think that gives you a pretty good sense of, if you want to move mountains, it can be done. It really can be done. So who's got some questions for me before I turn you loose and let you go do the wonderful things that you do?
Well, I don't have a I don't have a question. I just want to tell you that blew me away.
Yeah,
So,
me too. Just totally blew me away.
Totally.
Yeah, and I also know why I'm so unsuccessful but anyway.
Robert, you have tremendous credibility. You have tremendous credibility. And, I know what you want to do. I know what you want to see. And if this helps you at all move the healthcare system, I'm all over it. And I'm right here with you. And I got your back, because this really can work.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge undertaking. Obviously, it's almost 20% of our GMP. Yeah. Just a comment on the on the Aristotle's elements of communication. I look at ethos as you said, your credibility, how you come across as credible. The pathos is making that emotional connection, and that you talked a lot about, how you need to connect emotionally, not just, intelligently. And then the logos was the actually the strategy that you used to help convince someone, whether it's analytical
Yeah.
or strategic problem solving, that sort of thing.
Right.
I took 3 years of Greek in high school, so I'm I don't know. Every time I hear Aristotle or Socrates or something, my head spins. But yeah, I thought that was, but that was a fantastic talk. Wow, wow.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
thanks. Thank you so much,
I
Robert.
learned,
It
I learned a
matters to
lot.
me.
I learned a lot about how badly I've been doing with this whole thing.
No, you haven't been doing it badly, Robert. It's just there are a couple of tricks I can have you put in your back pocket.
Mm.
You've been doing a beautiful job, Robert. And I think why it's beautiful, why you have this credibility, is not just because you're a doctor with all that wonderful experience behind you. It's because you're a good guy, and you come across as a good guy.
Oh, you're
And
very
people
kind.
know that you care, and that's I mean that's really what they want, because they change their minds when they are feeling things, not when they're thinking things. They change their minds based on what they feel good about and what they feel bad about.
I'll add one other thing. You were talking about you had the picture with the big ear. Uh, I like to tell my students we were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we listen twice as much as we speak,
One would
and
hope.
and that's so important when you're seeing a patient, is not to do all the talking, is to do more listening.
Well, Robert, it's the article that you and Roger wrote for the journal. I mean, it's exactly that. If we listen, we learn. If we're talking, we're just regurgitating stuff we already know.
Yeah.
Looks like Michael's got his hand up there, so yeah.
Michael, hi, Michael.
Yeah. Hi, thanks so much. That was a great discussion.
Amazing.
Learned a lot. Full disclosure, when I saw Athos, Logos, and Pathos, I thought those were the Musketeers. Had to reset for a
Well,
second.
they sort of are. They sort of
Or
are.
are they the archangels, right?
Sort of are, yeah.
Or the Ninja
It's a good way to
Turtles.
remember them.
Yeah. It took me a second to reset there, but that model, yeah, I can't stop kind of thinking about that, and in part because it makes sense that you want to present it in that order, but I'm just thinking, especially in medicine, and those of us in academic medicine where we work with a lot of folks who are researchers and very data oriented, I wonder, for some folks, do we need to adjust that model a little bit? I mean, I think that, the credibility is always important, but, I've got folks, no matter who says it. I mean, the, the president of the US, the Pope could show up, but if the data's not there, they're not buying it.
That's because they're more interested in the pathos. So I'll give you a great example of that. We have a very large Hmong community out here. In the Hmong community, when the doctors, so I teach the doctors and the pharmacists how to get compliance from their patients. You automatically have, with a Hmong family, you wouldn't have any credibility as a doctor because they don't like authority figures. They've had a horrible life history, a cultural history of bad authority figures. So we now know that in order to get a patient who's from the Hmong community to take all of their pills, for example, you have to talk to the grandmother, because she's the one who will talk to the patient to tell them to take all the pills. They won't listen to the doctor. So, but keep in mind, not all of that is verbal. You automatically have some credibility just because they're showing up to see you. You don't have to sell yourself. And the logos, I just went through this with my husband. It's a perfect example of, he's been having some trouble with some neuroscience kinds of problems, which, by the way, are taken care of very nicely. But his doctor, who's a neurologist, was so good at this that afterwards I said to him, I said, do you mind if I give you some feedback to the doctor? And he looked at me like, oh God, here it comes, And I said, that was the most brilliant 20 minutes I ever spent with the doctor. I said, your skills at communication and getting buy-in are fantastic. And I said, I wish we could bottle that and sell it, because what he did with my husband, who's not a medicine taker, my husband hates taking chemicals in his system. He's not ever taken medicines. And the doctor said, there are various different meds you can take for this, but I'm just prescribing this one, and I want you to try it just to see if it works, because this one's been around for 40 years. It has 40 years worth of research behind it. And my husband's a PhD, and he said, okay, I'll try it. But it's how it made him feel. The data made him feel good. So even if you think it's data that's changing their mind, it really is the fact that that data made him feel good. So to him, logos is pathos. Does that make sense? That's a good question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And clearly you need all three. 'Cause I think in both of your examples, the grandmother from the Hmong community and the doctor with your husband, all three played in, but just in varying ways. So I think what I'm hearing is that there's a model, but we have to be a little bit flexible depending on the situation.
And depending on the receiver, because the meaning is in the receiver, so we have to adapt it to how they have to hear it. That's absolutely right. But it's not that you don't know that, but we also can now prove that. Great question.
Lori, this was just magnificent. I think that Alex Osborne and Sid Parnes called the stage acceptance finding, and this is just a dense but so stimulating. It's the master class on acceptance finding. That's a process, and it's
you're so right. And this is 40 years of my reading all that stuff and condensing it down to something that people can actually use and do, right? So you're right, you actually captured it. It's trying to capture all that theory and all that stuff, and let's put this into something people can use. I'm a recovering academic, right? So it's always bothered me that academics love to study this stuff. We just don't share it so that people can use it. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yes. So, ma'am, can I ask a question? Okay, so ma'am, I think this morning has really started with such a wonderful learning today. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to know, actually, ma'am, I'm working on how to bring in creativity and creative problem solving in medical curriculums in India. So when we are making the stakeholder mapping, which you mentioned in the center, the issue and the positives, the question marks and the negatives. So is it that the stakeholder mapping has to be like one of educators, one of students, one of researchers, like that, or all in one?
Only if they have the same agreement, right? So if you've got a really large group in one circle, they may not all be positives or they may not all be negatives. So I would break them out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I would even put students who agree with this in one, students who don't agree with this in another circle. I'd break them out according to their levels of agreement with each other. That's a good question.
Oh, wow. Great. Thank you so much. And the another thing I just wanted to know, like in the three types of evidences which you mentioned, the ethos, logos, and the pathos, the most important here is what? Like it's the data or the pathos, or like or
it's pathos. It's pathos.
Pathos. Yeah.
You have to have all three.
Yeah.
You have to have all three, but ultimately it's how a person feels about what you said that changes their mind. We're emotional creatures.
Yeah.
No matter how logical we hope we are, we still make decisions based on what feels right to us.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much. So ultimately, it's the affective domain which actually, comes up.
Yeah, and trying to change the largest population in the world to agree with us here, Hannah, that's a big undertaking. You might have a really large stakeholder map.
Yeah.
These are the people that will be the influencers. And actually, if it works, and you've mapped this right and you've connected the right people to be the change masters and so on, then just get
Yeah.
out of the way. It'll take care of itself.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
It
Thank
spreads
you.
like an antivirus.
Oh my
Thank
goodness.
you. Oh my God. Thank you so much.
Well, Larry, we've been talking about this. Archana, go ahead. Did you have a question?
I did. Just a comment and a question.
Go, please,
And
please.
thank you again. I echo what everybody says. What a wonderful learning experience. One of the statements you said about crawl inside who we really are kind of stuck with me. And also, it's about how do we take individuals, all of us seem to be wired to that commitment to being right, to be close, to be defensive. How do we, through this process that you mentioned, be able to kind of move up to be more open, to be more curious, to be more committed to learning? So, the value of the receiver is paramount here. And I just wondered if you had some tips and tricks to help move above that line.
I do actually. First of all, be open-minded, right? And I have to put a prompt by somebody. If it's something that really matters to me, I actually have to write on my hand in washable ink or something, just open, right? Just to remind myself. Put it on the back of a business card as a prompt in the middle of a heated discussion, just the word open, so I remember. Because we get in the heat of the moment, we're not going to remember that. we're gonna start getting entrenched, especially if the other people are entrenched. So number one is to be open-minded. I did a 7-year study and found out that even people who are ready for anything, no matter what, who actually are resilient and ready for anything, the number one attribute of somebody who can survive just about anything is an open mind and a spirit of curiosity. It is so extremely valuable. So that's how we can be better. But the way we can help others be better is lead with questions. Lead with questions instead of answers. We got a lot of people pounding us over the head with all the answers, but nobody's telling us what the question is. And there's a wonderful quote from, who is it, Roger? I can't remember.
Which one?
It's Rilke, the poet Rilke. A wonderful quote from him. He said something about if you're really disturbed by trying to find all the answers and so on and so forth, learn to love the questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send you that quote as well. I mean,
Please,
learn to love the questions, and asking people questions, which by the way, also need to be open-ended. Have you thought about it? Did you try is not really a question. That's just a disguised answer. But a real open-ended question, that's how we get them. And it actually activates the brain to be looking for answers as opposed to just having one. So those are my two, and I think those are pretty good ones. Start there, and I think you'll find it works a whole lot better. And the best question you can ever ask somebody is, what's the question I should be asking that I haven't asked yet? That's a great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow.
I know we're running out for time. Do we have time for a question?
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is absolutely wonderful. I'm going to be playing this back and sharing it with other people because I think it just hits home in so many ways. And I love the idea of the bench and starting with those that are on the bench and using them in a way. I'm a person that chooses a one-word New Year's resolution, and this year it actually was 2 words. What and why is what is that person feeling and why are they feeling that? And really trying to listen with curiosity, because there are times when I feel like I have like no emotional intelligence. But also I've stumbled on this book, this Think Again by Adam Grant.
Mm-hmm.
And I come from an Irish litter of 6 kids. 3 are on this side of politics, 3 are actually only 4 are on this side, 2 of us are on the other side, and it really has. And I want to maintain that family. And there was a question that Adam Grant said to kind of ask is, is there anything that might change your mind? Any thoughts? Have you come across the book Think Again, or in your thoughts, your key takeaways from that?
Oh, wow. I read so many books, but yes, I know that one. I think, well, Wow, just almost reread the book in my mind here as you asked me that. There are lots of really good questions. There are really lots of various ways, and rather than going to Grant's book, because I can't remember enough of the details of it, but it does fit into what we're talking about here just beautifully. We want people to think, but we also have to have an open enough question that they're actually really thinking rather than just regurgitating. And so I like those questions that you just brought up. I also like the questions of what do you want and what's stopping you from getting it? I love those two questions. So I think as I attach that to Grant's questions, that's what I would add. The question of what's stopping you is really powerful because that makes people's heads hurt, but it actually makes them go deeper into their thinking process. And it also helps them surface a lot of things that are getting in their way. So I think, what is it that you really want or hope for, and what's stopping you?
And just to give a little plug for the course, the whole "what's stopping you" is a technique that we use in creative problem solving to help you figure out what the real problem is and what's getting in the way. So yeah, actually, you folks have taken "what's stopping you" this and then turn into a question. So any other questions for Loree? Thank you, Loree, for your incredible generosity. You know, we've talked about your influence stuff for quite some time, but boy, I'm just if my chair had wheels, it has wheels on it, but it's coming, it's like I'm blown away at the door. So thank you. You just totally nailed it. Really, really appreciate this. David will have the recording ready for us, and thank you for sending all that stuff by. I'm thinking that our next date will be September 28th, because on September 21st is the book opening. And Michael, come over from Rochester, come over from India, Archana. So please be at the book opening for the new book, Solve the Real Problem. September 21st, 5:30 Seneca 1. Robert has already responded. He's going to be there. We got the book is due to go to the printer tomorrow. So
wow.
yeah. So Blair and I went out to dinner last night. I got word from the art director. She said, "I need you to check this, and it's going to go." So, okay, let's go. So
well, so tomorrow might just be a tipping point for the world. This is very, very good.
well, thank you. So thank you all. We'll look at September 28th. We'll and guys, the thing is too is that if you have topics that you want us to cover, we've covered so much neat stuff in here, from Ken on quality, from Mike Fox on organizations, from who's our friend that did the stuff on burnout, Nagma on burnout, and Gerard on foresight. So there's stuff that said, hey, can we cover this? We'll activate our network and see who we can get. And Loree, thank you so much for being here both days at so early in the morning. And it's 6:15 out there. Can I make you breakfast? So
yes.
Yeah. Blair and I are going for breakfast now. So everybody, thank you. And thank you for sending the handouts, and we'll get those to you. David, thank you always for your wonderful work on making this stuff go seamlessly. And please come to the book opening on September 21st. Dan, I'll see you at the farmers market with our friend Phil the farmer. And Loree, Blair, if you want to stay on for just a second. And
sure.
Thank you all so much. And just really, it's just such a real pleasure and an honor to be able to do this work with you all. So thanks.
Yes, thank you for all the incredible work you do. Thank you so much.
Yes.